Hi, my name is Linda Hutchinson, and I'm a volunteer with the League of Women Voters. I would also like to introduce my colleagues, Jennifer Barber, Kathy Marr, Trish Warner, and Jazz Vision. They have all helped with these workshops. So I'd like to ask you to put your questions in the chat, and we'll get to the chat questions after we've completed the slideshow. So our slideshow is called Is Media Ruining America? It's a 5-part series created by the League of Women Voters of Jefferson County and is now being presented by local leagues across the state of Colorado. This week, we're focusing on the history of media disinformation, or how we got here. The League of Women Voters is nonpartisan. We do not endorse candidates or political parties, but we do take positions on issues. Our positions on issues are arrived through a grassroots process of study and consensus, and our positions on issues are why we are here tonight. Transparency is a key tenet of the League of Women Voters. Citizens' right to know was adopted as a position in 1984. The League believes that democratic government depends upon informed and active participation of citizens at all levels of government. We also have a local news position. The League believes it is the responsibility of government to provide support for conditions under which credible local journalism can survive and thrive. And from our local news position as well, the League also believes that media literacy is essential and should be expanded in schools and communities. Before we begin, let's have a show of hands. How many people here have friends, family, neighbors, or others who embrace a different political perspective? And how many find it awkward or nearly impossible to discuss politics with them? Yeah. That political divide, that intense partisanship, is what we hope to address in these presentations. We recently queried Grok, Elon Musk's artificial intelligence engine. What is currently the biggest threat to Western civilization? Its reply was, and I quote, based on an analysis of recent expert assessments, reports, and analyses, including the World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report 2025, Ian Bremmer's Top Risks for 2025, and various governmental threat assessments from early to mid-2025, I conclude that the biggest current threat to Western civilization as of July 10th, 2025, is societal polarization fueled by mis and disinformation. Musk did not agree with this assessment, but this is what his AI served up. In the next few weeks, we plan to take a deep dive into the following topics. Today, we'll cover the history of media disinformation and how we got here. Next week, we'll cover recognizing bias in ourselves and in the media. In week 3, we'll cover how to recognize and deal with fake news. And in week 4, we'll cover artificial intelligence. For week 5, we've invited a panel of experts to share their thoughts on what we can do in the face of media disinformation, political polarization, and the loss of local news. So while a number of different sources were referenced for this presentation, the primary source is the book True or False, a CIA Analyst's Guide to Spotting Fake News by Cindy L. Otis. We hope these workshops will give you practical tools for navigating the current chaotic media environment and finding credible sources of information. So first, we want to clarify that we do not think that all media is bad. In these workshops, we make a distinction between traditional journalism and media. True journalism is information that features a systematic discipline of verification. That verification not only presents facts, but it presents the truth about the facts. Journalists credentialed by the U.S. Press Association are governed by a robust code of ethics designed to verify information, eliminate bias, confirm sources, avoid conflicts of interest, hold reporters accountable, and more. They may be traditional newspaper and broadcast reporters or freelance journalists, including bloggers, photographers, podcasters, and videographers, but they're governed by high journalistic standards and work hard to avoid personal and political bias and fake news. Media, as we use the term here, refers to the thousands of information channels proliferating across the globe today. While some conform to traditional journalism standards and practices, many do not. And in fact, a growing number of media influencers deliberately put out fake news or propaganda designed to promote a specific political agenda. It's getting harder and harder to know which media channels you can trust. And that's why what these workshops are designed to help us do. So let's start with a few more definitions. Media misinformation. Here we define it as people sharing information that is factually incorrect, but it's based on their beliefs, what they believe to be true, but it's also contradicted by the best publicly held information. Media disinformation is an attempt to deliberately spread inaccurate or false information in order to mislead others, presenting it in a way that makes people likely to believe it's true. In other words, it's fake news. And fake news has been with us since the beginning of time. This is nothing new. In 1274 BC, in ancient Egypt, the pharaoh Ramses was battling the Hittites for the control of the city of Kadesh. The fight was brutal. There were huge casualties on both sides. Ramses failed to gain control of the city and barely escaped with his life. However, Ramses being Ramses, he claimed unconditional victory in a poem about the battle. It was called the Poem of Pentower, which he distributed far and wide across his kingdom. It became the official history of the battle for hundreds of years until researchers discovered private letters documenting the truth. So the takeaway here is that history is written by the victors. Winners control the narrative. Fast forward a few centuries to the 1400s, and we saw the invention of the printing press. By 1605, folks in Europe were printing newspapers. By 1775, at least 37 different newspapers were being printed in the American colonies. The founding fathers deeply understood that a healthy democracy relies entirely on an informed citizenry. So remember our position, citizens' right to know. To make this a reality, they systemically built and leveraged the postal system to circulate news throughout the newly independent states. And you'd think that this was a historic advance in promoting information and supporting democracy. But during the first few decades of the United States, an era historians called the party press era, which was roughly from the 1780s to the 1830s, modern standards of objective journalism did not exist. Newspapers were openly, proudly, and aggressively biased. The takeaway: what passes as news is sometimes propaganda. By the late 1800s, U.S. newspapers were competing for readers. The widely publicized war between William Randolph Hearst, who owned the New York Journal, and Joseph Pulitzer, who owned the New York World, discovered that dramatic headlines and sensational and exaggerated stories, often completely untethered from the truth, sold more newspapers. This gave rise to the practice of yellow journalism, or the use of lurid features and sensationalized news to attract readers and increase circulation. The takeaway: fake news sells, profit drives content. And I think Kathy's going to put a link in the chat. A few years ago, the League of Women Voters of Colorado hosted a talk by Dr. Justin McBrayer on the fake news marketplace and why it matters. And he talked about exactly that fake news sells. The recording, I think she's putting the recording in the chat. So there are plenty of examples of the dangers of fake news in the Otis book. Among the most disturbing led to the carnage of the Second World War. In Germany under Hitler, Joseph Goebbels and his Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda mounted a campaign to spread fake anti-Semitic information about Jews. They painted them as the enemy of the people to incite violence and hatred against them. They called them greedy and corrupt and claimed they were trying to control the economy. And they told false stories of heinous crimes allegedly committed by the Jews. They also labeled any reporter or newspaper who criticized them as the Lügenpresse, or lying press. They took control of local media outlets and punished news outlets that spoke out against them. And by the end of the war, Nazi-controlled outlets published and broadcast almost nothing but fake news. They were able to convince an entire communities of people to turn on one another, or at least look the other way, while they murdered more than 6 million Jews during the Holocaust. The takeaway is that fake news can manipulate entire communities and lead to horrifying consequences. And Kathy's going to put another link in the chat. This is from an Instagram post of Walter Cronkite discussing the duty of questioning authority and the dangers of blind obedience during his appearance on The Late Show with David Letterman. He recounted how ordinary German citizens during World War II were just as guilty as the Nazis because they traded their right to know what their government was doing for blind faith in their government. So recent examples of fake news creating havoc in America. The first one is the 2020 election was stolen. Then there were the Haitian immigrants who were eating dogs and cats. Then there was the July assassination last year attempt on Donald Trump's life was staged. And then there was the protesters killed by ICE in Minneapolis in January 2026 were domestic terrorists. Fast forward to modern times and the rise of mass media. Mass media is defined as communication, whether written, broadcast, or spoken, that reaches a large audience. Today, we're awash in media, and that only amplifies the danger of spreading fake news. Let's look at recent developments fueling this fire. So from the 1950s to today, changes in regulations and rapid developments in technology have created a truly challenging media environment. In the 1950s, we had traditional media. Then in the 80s, we had deregulation. And in the 80s, we had talk radio and cable TV. And in the 90s, we had internet expansion. And the mid-2000s, we had podcasting. And 2017 saw Substacks. And the 2020s saw explosion of AI. So it's like it's enough information to make your brain explode. In the 1950s, there were standard sources of media where everyone could go to the news. In print, we had the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. Those were they covered national news, and people had trusted sources for local news like the Denver Post and the Rocky Mountain News. In 1950, almost everyone subscribed to a newspaper, and many households had more than one. On television, we had 3 broadcast channels, ABC, CBS, and NBC, featuring trusted commentators like Edward R. Murrow, Chet Huntley, and David Brinkley, and Walter Cronkite, who was often referred to as the most trusted man in America. Journalists conformed to a standard of journalistic ethics, and broadcast news was regulated to ensure news was presented in the public interest. and a concerted effort was made to show both sides of an issue. This created a common culture where readers and viewers accessed the same news sources and got the same trusted information. Everyone had a common worldview and one set of facts. Then everything changed, and very rapidly. The Fairness Doctrine, which was imposed by the FCC in 1949, required the holders of federal broadcast licenses to devote part of their airtime to current issues of importance to the public interest and to air opposing points of view. Broadcast licensees were expected to provide fair, honest, and balanced reporting and equitable time to controversial issues. In 1987, the Federal Communications Commission, by a unanimous vote, decided to end the Fairness Doctrine. Now, the only thing governing the news is the First Amendment, which protects free speech in America. Sadly, it also allows commentators and influencers to say whatever they want, whether it's true or not, under the guise of protected speech. There are a few narrow categories prohibited by the First Amendment, including obscenity, child pornography, true threats, fraud, and more, but these are very difficult to prove. Challenging speech on the basis of these exemptions is difficult and expensive and beyond the resources of most people. Consequently, most speech survives these challenges, and even offensive, false, and hateful speech is usually protected. This has opened the floodgates to the proliferation of fake news. But I have to add that the First Amendment, there's another side to this. When you take away someone else's rights to the First Amendment, you will take away your own rights. And we all have the right to free speech right now. So in the 1990s, Congress passed the Telecommunications Act, which, among other things, dramatically raised limits of media ownership, allowing media corporations to own more and more local radio and television stations. Before this, regulations aimed to ensure media diversity and prevent any single entity from dominating the market. The Telecommunications Act led to intense consolidation in the industry, so that now a staggering 90% of what we read, watch, or listen is controlled by 6 industry giants. 90%. This, along with competition from digital media outlets, has led to devastating loss of local news. 40% of U.S. newspapers have shut down in the last 20 years, including 130 closures in the past year alone. More than half of the U.S. counties now have no or very limited access to local news. Over 50 million Americans, about 15% of the country, live in areas with little or no reliable local reporting. And rural regions are hit the hardest by this because entire towns have lost their only newspaper, leaving communities without basic civic information. Recently, a hedge fund has been acquiring scores of U.S. newspapers, gutting the newsrooms and selling off assets, and steadily increasing the cost to subscribe. In fact, they purchased the Denver Post in 2010. There's a great documentary that chronicles the buyout this buyout, and it's called News Matters, how this vulture hedge fund's gutting of local newsrooms could hurt Americans. You can find that on PBS, and there's another one called Stripped for Parts. And there's probably something about Stripped for Parts on the Colorado Sun website. And if you have not checked out the Colorado Sun website, I recommend it. It's a great independent news source. And it consists of people who had to leave the Rocky Mountain News when it folded. And as we speak, the parent company of 9 News is being acquired by the parent company of Fox 31 in Denver. Pending approval, the stations will be combined. And in December 2025, conservative broadcast giant Sinclair made a bid to buy out UW Scripps, which owns Denver 7. Fortunately, the bid was rejected. However, Sinclair has its eye on other Colorado news outlets in Western Colorado. It's part of a larger trend in the erosion of local news, where thousands of reporter and editor jobs have been cut in the past decade. It makes it harder and harder to get credible information about local issues like elections, education, crime, and corruption. When local news dwindles, residents lose access to government accountability because there's fewer watchdogs covering city councils, school boards, and police. Community identity is lost. I like to think of local newspapers as a town square where you can read about local sports and events, obituaries, shared stories, who's getting married, all that stuff, and it's just gone when you lose your newspaper. Voter knowledge, there are less informed elections and more misinformation, and civic engagement. There's lower turnout, weaker community ties. The implications of these changes are significant. With fewer independent voices, the stories we consume increasingly reflect the priorities and politics of corporate entities rather than diverse public interests. The repeal of the Fairness Doctrine also allowed talk radio to flourish. Talk radio has been around for years, but entered a new era with the birth of the Rush Limbaugh show in the 1980s. By the mid-1990s, talk radio ranked as the second most popular radio format. Figures like Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and Dave Ramsey became household names, shaping public opinion on the right with shows like Counterspin, and on the left with shows like Talk Left. Stations were now they're even increasingly politicized. By 2022, there were only 50 liberal radio stations in the US, but nearly 2,000 conservative radio stations. Here again, the winners control the narrative.
We also saw a precipitous rise in cable television news, giving Americans access to more and more channels. According to POI data, as of November 2025, there are nearly 2,800 cable channels in the US, offering programming to millions of viewers. Cable television also gave birth to the 24/7 news cycle. Instead of everyone watching the same nightly news together, now viewers had access to news all day, every day, from wildly divergent sources. In order to keep viewers' attention, news anchors relied more and more on opinion and analysis versus straight news. Key messages are repeated endlessly during the day, and that repetition of messaging, whether true or not, encourages belief. As Joseph Goebbels said, if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. Stories often focused on politics, and increasingly, newscasters encouraged sensational stories, divisive arguments, and angry narratives instead of thoughtful debates. They used language decided to spark outrage, with right-leaning channels calling Democrats snowflakes, radicals, Marxist lunatics, and anti-American, and left-leaning channels calling Republicans racists, fascists, authoritarian, and anti-democratic. And fake news spread like wildfire. Then came the internet, as if it wasn't bad enough. The internet has revolutionized media like never before. It began in the 1960s as a project of the US Department of Defense, where it was used mostly by scientists. By the 1990s, more and more businesses were connecting. The internet went from 130 websites in 1993 to almost 2 billion by 2019. As of October 2025, more than 6 billion individuals worldwide were internet users, which amounted to 73.2% of the global population. This gave rise to the birth of social media, including Facebook, YouTube, X or Twitter, Blue Sky, Reddit, Truth Social, TikTok, and dozens of others, further splintering the media market and ushering in a new wild, wild west of media communications. In October of 2025, 5.66 billion, or 68.7% of the world's population, were social media users. According to the Pew Research Center, more than half of people get news from networks like Facebook, X, and YouTube, overtaking TV at 50% and news sites and apps at 48%. And 8 in 10 young adults get their news from social media. In fact, 1 in 5 Americans now get their news from TikTok. Today's internet is like the wild, wild west, new and exciting territory with few guardrails. Anyone with access to a computer can post content on the internet across hundreds of websites and social media channels with an eye toward maximizing profits, and in many cases, little regard for the truth. Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act, passed in 1996, shields platforms from liability for user content. This makes sweeping regulation hard to design or enforce. And now that political parties have embraced digital communications to advance their agendas, they're less interested in regulating fake or misleading content, or even hate speech. Some lawmakers are pushing bills on privacy, child safety, and platform accountability. But Congress is divided on whether platforms censor too much or too little, slowing bipartisan agreement. So for now, it's pretty much a free-for-all. The internet also gave rise to the phenomenon of bots. Bots are automated programs created to perform a particular job, such as tweeting an article link 100 times a day, or posting provocative quotes, memes, and even AI-generated photos and videos. Social media bots, or social bots, generate false social media activity such as fake accounts, follows, likes, or comments. By imitating human activity on social media platforms, they spam content, boost popularity, or spread misinformation. And they are proliferating on the internet. As Otis notes, individuals, groups, and governments realized that they could turn social media into a weapon, using fake accounts and bots to influence politics, elections, the economy, and as a result, even the course of history. This made it even harder to determine if information on the internet was true or false. Chapter 11 in the Otis book provides egregious examples of how people misuse the internet for personal and political gain. A gay girl in Damascus, purportedly chronicling the adventures of a gay Syrian girl during the Arab Spring, but really the work of a 40-year-old straight married male American graduate student. Fake news about an Ebola virus outbreak in Dallas. Or the network of fake news sites run by a man from Southern California proclaiming that Obama advocated eating dogs. Now we're seeing the rise of podcasts and Substacks. Podcasting is an increasingly popular pastime in the US, and according to the latest figures, close to 160 million Americans consume podcasts every month. 21% of American adults, or 1 in 5, now regularly get their news from news influencers on social media and content creators. Among 18 to 29-year-olds, the number jumps to 38%. Podcasts like The Ben Shapiro Show, Pod Save America, The Glenn Beck Show, and the Midas Touch podcast are shaping the political narrative for millions of Americans on a daily basis. More recently, creators, journalists, politicians, and influencers have turned to Substack, an American online platform that provides publishing, payment, analytics, and design infrastructure to support subscription-based content, including newsletters, podcasts, and video. By June of 2025, Substack had more than 5 million paid subscriptions and 40 million active readers globally. Today, there are hundreds of social media platforms, and dozens of them have at least 100 million active monthly users. There are hundreds of political podcasts and Substacks, all vying for our attention, and people are accessing them more and more often. And now we're facing an even bigger challenge with the birth of artificial intelligence, or AI. Artificial intelligence is defined as the capability of computational systems to perform tasks typically associated with human intelligence, such as learning, reasoning, problem-solving, perception, and decision-making. Malign actors are exploring AI to create synthetic media that enhances their existing methods of operation. The rise of deepfake photos, audio, and video is frightening and is expanding in digital media channels even as we speak. Recent deepfake examples include manipulated audio of Joe Biden urging voters to stay home during primaries, and fabricated images of Donald Trump using a walker. Generative artificial intelligence is an increasingly prominent tool in the disinformation toolbox, driving an even deeper wedge between truth and lies and the right and the left. So ask yourself, how do I access news? Do it by digital, by print, by internet? How much time do I spend reading traditional journalism and digital media? Interesting questions to ask yourself. Usage statistics tell us that in 2025, Americans spent an average of 12 hours and 36 minutes with media. This includes time spent on various media formats, such as television, audio, news, and social media. The shift toward digital consumption has been significant, with traditional media losing some of its audience to digital platforms. The shift in consumption towards digital media in the country started in 2018, and this trend has been growing ever since. Traditional media, while still important, are nevertheless losing the attention of U.S. users. In fact, according to Statistica, American consumers spend around 8 hours of their day with digital media, like media channels accessed via the internet, roughly double the time invested in traditional formats. How does all of this affect our culture and our democracy? The impacts are frightening. We have proliferation of fake news, loss of trust, increase in foreign influence, politics of outrage, increased polarization, party over policy. New words have entered the media lexicon. We heard the words alternative facts first in 2017 to explain different numbers put out by the right and the left to describe crowd size at the presidential inauguration. Fake news has proliferated to the point that PolitiFact, a Pulitzer Prize-winning fact-checking website of the Poynter Institute, named 2025 the year of the lies. In past years, they've picked out one lie of the year to highlight. In 2025, there were too many to choose just one. Not only are we facing an epidemic of fake news from politicians, news outlets, chatbots, and others, we're also seeing the term fake news used to label anything critical of policy issues or actions. Remember Goebbels' lying press, Lügenpresse? Cindy Otis notes that politicians use this as a strategy. In fact, she tells of when Donald Trump was interviewed by 60 Minutes and was asked why he calls the media fake news. His response, "You know why I do it? I do it to discredit you all and demean you all so when you write negative stories about me, no one will believe you." This, among other things, has resulted in a significant erosion of trust in media. As you can see in this graph, Americans' trust in mass media, including newspapers, television, and radio, dropped from nearly 70% in 1975 to a new all-time low of 28% in 2025. And even this erosion of trust has a partisan bent, with all parties losing trust in media, but Republicans losing trust at a much greater rate. This loss of trust in traditional media also serves to drive people into new, more partisan channels, where reporting aligns with their political beliefs and they can feel comfortable. Gone are the days when a few dominant news outlets reached massive audiences. With the explosion of digital platforms, the proliferation of media options has exploded, fracturing our access to and understanding of the news. We no longer share a common narrative of political events, and our news is increasingly untethered from the truth. It's almost impossible to control the proliferation of fake news on digital media channels. They allow people to share and monetize content anonymously with very little personal risk. They enable fake news to go viral. There are plenty of egregious examples of how people misuse the internet for personal and political gain. Remember Pizzagate? The tens of thousands of fraudulent voters found in an Ohio warehouse? Digital channels also allow our political enemies to use them to spark division and chaos. It's been documented that Russia purposely interfered in the 2016 election by using a troll farm called the Internet Research Agency, or IRA, to spread disinformation online about the election and candidates. They created thousands of fake social media accounts that look like they belong to real Americans. And they posted YouTube videos, memes, websites, and digital ads on social media sites. By the summer of 2016, the IRA was spending more than $1.25 million per month and had hundreds of employees. By October of 2017, Twitter had found nearly 4,000 accounts that were run by the IRA. Now let's talk about outrage. We all see a lot of that. Modern media is manipulating us with content that hooks us with fear and anger. The use of outrage has emerged as a dominant force in modern media, shaping narratives, influencing public opinion, and driving user engagement to unprecedented levels. Why? Because outrage sells. Stories that provoke anger and indignation are more likely to drive audience engagement than those that present rational facts. This practice led the Oxford University Press to proclaim the 2025 word of the year to be rage bait. According to Oxford's definition, rage bait is defined as online content deliberately designed to elicit anger or outrage by being frustrating, provocative, or offensive. Rage bait is typically posted in order to increase traffic to or engagement with a particular web page or social media account. There's an economic component to outrage. Businesses have learned that it drives profit, influence, and policy. It follows that those in power have an interest in managing and even fabricating it. Political think tanks, marketing firms, and data analytics companies now specialize in manipulating public indignation. There's a psychological component to outrage, too. It can amplify biases, deepen political polarization, create a sense of tribal community and deep mistrust of the other, and create a perpetual sense of crisis. And it's addictive. Human neurobiology rewards anger. It also triggers dopamine reward receptors in the brain, in the same way drugs like cocaine and methamphetamines do. That's scary. Our brains are hardwired to seek out behaviors that release dopamine in our reward system. It makes you feel good and leaves you needing more and more anger and outrage to elicit the same pleasurable response. Gartner predicts that by 2028, about 1 billion people will be affected by digital addiction. Algorithms are pushing people into a political echo chamber. An algorithm is a process or set of rules to be followed in calculations or other problem-solving operations, especially by a computer. Simply put, it is a data tracking system in which an individual's internet search history and browsing habits are used to present them with similar or related material on social media or other platforms. Do you follow political issues or politicians on the internet? If so, an algorithm tells the computer to dish up more and more political content. And it's divided into left-leaning or right-leaning content, depending on the preference of the user. Before you know it, algorithms are dishing up content that affirms your worldview. They increasingly present the opposition as threatening or dangerous. They sensationalize actions and issues from the opposing party that you disagree with, because anger is a powerful emotion and can increase your time on the platform. They also filter out any opposing facts or views that may question your worldview and provide a steady stream of content that starts to feel like the dominant truth of the world. Algorithms understand the economics of outrage. A left-leaning user is seeing content about how important immigrants are to our culture and economy. They see stories of undocumented immigrants raising families, contributing taxes to our economy, even saving the lives of children threatened by flood or fire. They see ICE agents brutalizing and deporting immigrants here legally, who are attending required court dates on their path to citizenship. A right-leaning user sees content about how illegal aliens are living on the streets, murdering our children, trafficking drugs, and ruining our country. They see ICE agents rounding up and deporting dangerous criminals and cartel members and making America safe again. And guess what? Both things are true. But media has lost its ability to deliver the full picture of our issues based on complete facts. Instead, it pokes us into outrage with partisan propaganda and deepens the divisions between us. Media outlets are self-sorting into political echo chambers, doing more to manipulate viewers and listeners versus arming them with facts and data. This is a chart from Ad Fontes that rates media across two axes. The left axis ranks media according to its credibility or reliability. The media outlets near the top of the chart are the most reliable. Those at the bottom are deemed to present inaccurate or unreliable information, fake news. The bottom axis ranks media according to where they fall on the political spectrum. The ones in the middle are deemed to be the most centrist. The ones on the far left and far right are ranked as extreme and or hyperpartisan. And I believe Kathy put that link to Ad Fontes in the chat. It's really worth your time to check that out if you've never seen that before. So, how do we fight this? It's a daunting challenge, and it's hard to know how to fix it. In the next few workshops, we'll look at some solutions. We'll talk about confronting bias in ourselves and in the media, how to recognize and combat media disinformation and propaganda, AI and its effects on our democracy, and finally, we'll hear from a panel of experts about how to address these challenges. And we're really excited about those experts, those local experts in week 5. So let's review some key takeaways. In the history of media disinformation, we learned that winners control the narrative. What passes as news is often propaganda, or sometimes propaganda. Fake news sells, and content is increasingly driven by profit. Fake news can manipulate entire communities and lead to horrifying consequences. It is dangerous. In more modern times, we learned that deregulation and technology have compounded and accelerated these risks. We're seeing dangerous consolidation in media ownership and a drastic loss in reliable local news. It's harder and harder to find media that promotes true journalism, content governed by ethics and high journalistic standards. Modern media, driven by the quest for profit and increasing interference from foreign adversaries, is dividing our country and threatening our democracy. Combating these trends will take increased awareness and intentional effort to get the facts. So, something to think about before next week. Where do you get your political news? And where does it land in the political sphere? So you can look at different news channels, websites, articles, TV, video, podcasts, audio, and evaluate where you think those land on that Ad Fontes chart is really a good place to start. How many are at the top and in the middle? How many lean left? How many lean right? And allsides.com is also another excellent source that provides left, right, and center perspectives on different news stories. So next week, if you can watch or listen to media outside of what you normally listen to, if you're on the right, listen to some things on the left. If you're on the left, listen to some things on the right. And another suggestion is to watch opinion commentators on different sides of an issue than you're normally used to reading or hearing about. You can try podcasts. You can listen to left-leaning ones or right-leaning ones, and be ready to discuss what you discovered about yourself. And next week, we'll be discussing bias, how to recognize it in ourselves and in media. And this comes from part 3 of the True or False book by Otis, and it's in chapters 14, 15, and 16. If you're interested in that book, it's a pretty good book. I've read most of it. And we want to give a special thanks to some of our graphic designers and our marketing people, advisors, and panelists, and so on. And we also have news literacy references. The League of Women Voters from Larimer County has a page full of tips and references for navigating today's information ecosystem. Excellent resources there. And also there is a project of Maine, Alaska, and Colorado called Let's Talk About Digital Threats to Democracy. And so I think that is it.
Okay, thanks. I wanted to correct before we get to, if you've got anything in the chat, I just wanted to correct something I said. I made a mistake and I don't want to spread any false information, so I need to correct it. I think the attempt on Donald Trump's life, the assassination attempt, it was not 2025, it was 2024, I believe. But check it before before you say anything to anybody. Okay. I think you're on mute, Trish.
Sorry about that. So I just see a couple of comments here, one being well done and thanking you for the presentation. There is a comment in here asking to please also address personalization, moving from mass media to personalized media, augmented by AI with whatever biases are being used in the funding and training of these. So more a comment than a question. And then also a comment, thank you for the balanced view and citing sources. Great presentation. So Jazz, I'll turn it over to you if you see anything else there.
It looks like I just wanted to check real quick. Jim, in your comment there, did you have a question or was that just I guess, more of a suggestion for how we might be able to change some of the content in the future? If it's a question, just pop in the chat and let us know, and then maybe we can address it. But it looks like Karen Heckman says, will this be up on the website? And she said, great. and we are going to be posting it on the website, I believe, right?
Yes.
It is being recorded, so yeah, it will definitely be up on the website. And I think that's about it. Oh no, there's one more there. Trish, do you want to handle the next one there? From Jill
Sure.
O.
Yeah, from Jill O. Can't media also provide agency for those who are underrepresented, such as abused women? And Michelle is again saying very informative. Thank you very much. And Jim indicated that his comment was an issue for the future. So that looks like the end of the chat.
Okay, if we don't have any more comments, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and I hope you'll come to the second session next Tuesday. All of our sessions will be on Tuesday, except for the last one with our panel discussion, and that will be on Monday, August 10th. But they're all at the same time, and they're all on Zoom. And you can register for on the calendar page, the League of Women Voters of Larimer County calendar page. Can you, anybody else think of anything else? Do you want we should be telling people? I guess I can tell you who the panelists will be for the panel discussion. We have John Valenkamp of the Reporter Herald, Professor Krishna Swami, Professor Wolfgang, and Professor Pennington from CSU, and Professor Borg from Front Range Community College. And they'll be helping us tie this all together, all this information, and tell us what we can do to protect ourselves from mis and disinformation. Okay.
Great.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Mhm.